August 7th, 1943, 11:37 at night, Vella Gulf, Solomon Islands. Commander Frederick Moosbrugger stands on the bridge of USS Dunlap, his eyes fixed on the radar scope glowing green in the darkness. The numbers scroll past. 22,000 yards, contact established. 4 targets. Japanese destroyers approaching from the north at nearly 50 knots combined closing speed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. His 6 American destroyers are invisible against the dark shoreline. The Japanese do not see them. For once, the Americans have achieved what seemed impossible 1 year ago. Surprise. Total surprise. In the confined waters of the Solomons. Moosbrugger issues the order at 11:41. Fire torpedoes. 24 Mark 15 torpedoes leap from their tubes and race through the black water at 46 knots. His ships turn sharply to starboard, putting distance between themselves and any potential counterattack. The crews wait. 60 seconds. 90 seconds. 2 minutes. Then the night erupts. 3 massive explosions tear through Japanese destroyers, Hagikaze, Arashi, and Kawakaze. The ships burst into flames. A 4th torpedo strikes Shigure's rudder but fails to detonate. She escapes into darkness. The other 3 burn and sink. 1,500 Japanese soldiers and sailors die in minutes. American losses? 0. Not a single hit on an American ship, not a single casualty. In Tokyo, Japanese naval intelligence receives the report with stunned disbelief. American destroyers have just won a decisive night torpedo action. This was not supposed to be possible. For 20 months of war, Japanese forces had owned the night. Their superior training, their devastating long-lance torpedoes, and their mastery of darkness had given them victory after victory in the Brost, Solomons. American ships had been sunk. American sailors had died. American admirals had failed. Until now. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The Battle of Vella Gulf was not an accident. It was not luck. It was the culmination of 1 year of bitter lessons purchased with thousands of American lives. 1 year of studying Japanese tactics. 1 year of fixing broken equipment. 1 year of developing new doctrine. 1 year of learning how to attack first instead of reacting second. This is the story of how the United States Navy transformed its destroyer tactics from defensive failure to offensive dominance. How American commanders learned to reverse the most devastating weapon in the Pacific, and how a single commodore named Arleigh Burke created the tactical system that would crush Japanese naval supremacy and save hundreds of American ships in the battles to come. The transformation began with catastrophe. August 9th, 1942, exactly 1 year before Vella Gulf. The same waters, the same darkness, a different outcome. The Battle of Savo Island. Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa commanded 7 Japanese cruisers and 1 destroyer steaming down the slot toward Guadalcanal. American and Australian forces had invaded the Solomon Islands 2 days earlier. They had captured an unfinished Japanese airfield at Lunga Point. Transport ships filled with supplies sat anchored off the beaches. Protecting them were 8 Allied cruisers and 15 destroyers under British Rear Admiral Victor Crutchley. The Allied ships were exhausted. 3 days of continuous operations. 3 days of Japanese air attacks. 3 days without proper rest. Their crews stood at battle stations with red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands. Many had not slept in 72 hours. Mikawa's plan was simple. Approach under cover of darkness. Strike the screening force, before it could react. Sink the cruisers protecting the transports. The attack would occur at 1:30 in the morning, when exhaustion and darkness provided maximum advantage. The Allied defensive arrangement should have been sufficient. Cruisers were positioned north and south of Savo Island. Destroyer pickets guarded the approaches. Radar-equipped ships scanned for contacts. Standard defensive protocols were in place. but protocols meant nothing if commanders did not enforce them properly. Communication failures plagued the Allied force from the start. Admiral Crutchley left his command ship to attend a conference, taking one of his cruisers out of position. He never returned before the battle. The screening force operated without unified command during the crucial hours. Worse, several Allied ships had detected Mikawa's approach earlier in the day. Aircraft spotted the Japanese cruisers moving south through the slot. Radio reports were sent. The information reached headquarters, but the warning never reached all ships in the screening force. Some commanders went to sleep believing the Japanese were hours away. Others never received any intelligence at all about approaching enemy vessels. At 1:43 in the morning, USS Patterson broadcast a desperate radio alarm. Warning, warning. Strange ships entering harbour. Within seconds, Japanese searchlights illuminated Allied cruisers. Parachute flares dropped from float planes turned night into day. 8-inch shells began striking before American gunners could train their weapons. The Japanese had achieved complete surprise. In the confined waters between Savo Island and Guadalcanal, against ships equipped with radar, against experienced commanders, complete surprise. The reason was doctrine. American tactical doctrine emphasized guns over torpedoes. Long-range gunfire was considered the decisive weapon in naval combat. Torpedoes were secondary weapons for finishing damaged ships or attacking capital vessels. This thinking shaped everything from training to combat procedures to ship positioning. Japanese doctrine was exactly opposite. Torpedoes were the primary weapon. Guns supported torpedo attacks. The Type 93 long-lance torpedo gave Japanese destroyers and cruisers an overwhelming advantage in night combat. The weapon was 29.5 feet long, 24 inches in diameter, over 6,000 pounds. The warhead carried 1,080 pounds of explosive, enough to break a destroyer in half with a single hit. More importantly, the long lance had incredible range, 11 miles at 49 knots, 22 miles at 36 knots. American Mark 15 torpedoes had maximum range of 6,000 yards at 45 knots. The Japanese weapon had nearly 4 times the effective range of American torpedoes, and the long lance was nearly weightless. It used pure oxygen instead of compressed air for propulsion. The exhaust was mostly carbon dioxide and water, a vapor which dissolved quickly. American torpedoes left visible white tracks that alerted targets and revealed firing positions. The long lance was invisible until it struck. At Savo Island, Mikawa's cruisers launched Type 93 torpedoes from beyond the effective range of American weapons. The torpedoes slashed through the water unseen. They struck HMAS Canberra first. 2 long lance hits tore massive holes in the Australian cruiser's hull. The ship began sinking immediately. Her captain was mortally wounded. The gunnery officer died in the first explosion. Power failed. Canberra never fired a shot in her own defence. USS Chicago took a long lance hit that blew off a section of her bow. The cruiser survived but was crippled. Her captain never broadcast a proper warning to other Allied ships. The northern group of cruisers had no idea Japanese forces had penetrated the screening perimeter. Mikawa's column curved around Savo Island and fell upon the northern group, USS Quincy. USS Vincennes and USS Astoria steamed in a box patrol pattern, completely unprepared for combat. Japanese searchlights caught them. Gunfire followed instantly. Long lance torpedoes struck from multiple directions. Quincy burned from stem to stern. She capsized and sank within 30 minutes. 389 sailors died with their ship. Vincennes took multiple torpedo and shell hits. Her engineering spaces flooded. Her guns fell silent. She sank at 2:50 in the morning. 342 men were killed. Astoria fought back desperately. Her gunners scored hits on Japanese cruiser Chokai, but long lance torpedoes struck her amidships. Fires raged out of control. The order to abandon ship came at noon on August 9th. 235 crew members died. In 37 minutes, Vice Admiral Mikawa had sunk 4 Allied heavy cruisers and killed over 1,000 sailors. Japanese losses? Minimal damage to Chokai. 58 casualties across the entire force. Savo Island was the worst defeat in United States Navy history up to that point. Worse than Pearl Harbor in tactical terms. Worse because the fleet was at sea, alert, equipped with radar, and expecting potential enemy contact. They still lost decisively. The defeat sent shockwaves through the Pacific Fleet. Admiral Ernest King delayed telling President Roosevelt the full scope of the losses. The Marines on Guadalcanal faced reduced naval support and supplies only partially unloaded. Japanese warships controlled the waters around the island at night. The Tokyo Express ran reinforcements to Japanese garrisons with impunity. American commanders struggled to explain what had happened. The official inquiry board interviewed surviving officers for months. Their report identified multiple failures: poor communication between services, inadequate radar training, divided command structure, exhausted crews operating without rest, ships positioned incorrectly for mutual support. But the fundamental problem went deeper than tactical errors. American destroyer doctrine was fundamentally flawed for night combat in confined waters. The emphasis on long-range gunfire and defensive screening left destroyers vulnerable to Japanese torpedo attacks. The weapons that should have been their primary offensive capability, their torpedoes, were treated as secondary armaments rarely used in actual combat. The Japanese had spent decades perfecting night torpedo tactics. Their destroyers trained extensively in darkness. Their crews could estimate range and bearing by eye in conditions where American sailors saw nothing. Their torpedo directors calculated firing solutions faster than American equipment. Their oxygen-propelled long-lance torpedoes allowed them to launch from distances American commanders thought were safe. Most critically, Japanese forces attacked aggressively with torpedoes while American forces waited to react with guns. Initiative belonged to whoever struck first. In the darkness of the Solomons, that was always Japan. The pattern repeated throughout late 1942. Battle of Cape Esperance in October. First Naval Battle of Guadalcanal in November. Battle of Tassafaronga in November. Each engagement demonstrated the same problems. American cruisers and destroyers operating in long columns to maximize gunfire. Japanese destroyers launching massed torpedo attacks from unexpected angles. American ships sinking from long-lance hits before they could effectively return fire. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Tassafaronga was particularly devastating. Rear Admiral Carleton Wright commanded 5 American cruisers and 4 destroyers against 8 Japanese destroyers attempting to resupply Guadalcanal. American radar detected the Japanese first. Wright's cruisers opened fire and sank 1 destroyer. Victory seemed certain. Then Japanese Rear Admiral Raizo Tanaka ordered his surviving destroyers to launch torpedoes. Type 93 long lances raced toward the American column. USS Northampton took 2 hits and sank. USS Minneapolis, USS New Orleans, and USS Pensacola all suffered severe torpedo damage. The Japanese destroyers escaped with minimal losses. Admiral Samuel J. Cox, director of the Naval History and Heritage Command, later described Tassafaronga and Savo Island as 2 of the worst defeats in United States Navy history, behind only Pearl Harbor. The losses were not just material, they were psychological. Japanese forces had proven they could defeat larger American formations in night combat. They had proven the long lance was superior to anything the United States Navy possessed. They had proven their tactics were better. Something had to change. Lieutenant Commander Arleigh Burke sat in his quarters aboard USS Waller in early 1943, studying after-action reports from Savo Island, Cape Esperance, and Tassafaronga. Burke commanded Destroyer Division 43. He was 31 years old. His division had not yet seen significant combat, but Burke understood that when his turn came, Current American tactics would get his ships sunk and his sailors killed. Burke was a natural analyst. He absorbed information from every available source: battle reports, intelligence summaries, Japanese tactical manuals captured from sunken ships, interviews with survivors who had faced long-lance attacks, technical specifications on the Type 93 torpedo, everything that might reveal how to defeat an enemy that seemed invincible at night. The core problem was simple to identify. American destroyers were being used defensively to screen cruisers rather than offensively to attack enemy ships. They stayed close to the larger vessels they were protecting. They waited for orders before taking action. They held their fire until cruisers engaged. These procedures made sense for protecting against aircraft or submarines. They were fatal against Japanese torpedo attacks. Burke began developing new tactical concepts in spring 1943. His ideas were radical departures from established doctrine. He proposed that destroyers should operate independently from cruisers during night engagements. They should be positioned to detect enemy ships first using radar. They should immediately attack with torpedoes upon making contact. They should fire first and ask questions later. Initiative mattered more than perfect coordination. The tactical formation Burke envisioned used 2 short columns of destroyers instead of 1 long column following cruisers. The first column would detect the enemy and launch torpedoes silently without opening fire with guns. The second column would be positioned to follow up with gunfire after torpedo explosions revealed enemy positions. Both columns would maneuver independently based on radar contacts rather than following rigid formation procedures. This approach exploited American technological advantages while negating Japanese superiority in night fighting. American SG surface search radar could detect ships at ranges up to 22,000 yards. Japanese lookouts, no matter how well trained, could not match that detection capability. If American destroyers used radar to find the enemy first, they could launch torpedoes before being seen. Surprise would belong to the United States Navy instead of Japan. Burke faced significant resistance to his ideas. Senior officers questioned whether destroyer captains could be trusted to operate independently without making terrible mistakes. The memory of Savo Island haunted decision-makers. What if destroyers fired on friendly ships in the darkness? What if they abandoned their screening duties and left cruisers vulnerable? What if aggressive tactics led to unnecessary losses? Burke argued that current tactics were already producing unnecessary losses. American ships were being sunk because they reacted instead of acting. They were being hit by torpedoes, launched from beyond the range where they could effectively fight back. Defensive doctrine guaranteed defeat against an enemy that attacked aggressively. The only way to win was to strike first. The debate continued through spring and summer 1943. Meanwhile, Japanese forces continued running reinforcements to their garrisons in the Solomons. The Tokyo Express operated with frustrating regularity. American PT boats tried to intercept the runs. They launched dozens of torpedoes and sank almost nothing. On August 1st, PT 109, commanded by Lieutenant John F. Kennedy, was rammed and sunk by Japanese destroyer Amagiri. The small boats were brave but ineffective against determined enemy forces. Something had to break the pattern. The opportunity came in early August. American intelligence detected another Tokyo Express run scheduled for August 6th. 4 Japanese destroyers would carry 900 troops and 50 tons of supplies to Vila on Kolombangara. They would travel through Vela Gulf, the passage between Vela La Vela and Kolombangara Islands. Rear Admiral Theodore Wilkinson commanded 3rd Amphibious Force and Task Force 31. After the battles at Kula Gulf and Kolombangara, he was short of undamaged cruisers. His immediately available force was Task Group 31.2, a pure destroyer strike force. 6 ships, no cruisers, no battleships, just destroyers. Commodore Arleigh Burke had been commanding the destroyer strike force since late July. But Burke was reassigned on August 3rd. When Wilkinson received intelligence about the upcoming Tokyo Express run on August 5th, he needed a new commander for the interception mission. Commander Frederick Moosbrugger had recently arrived at Tulagi. He had served under Burke on a previous mission. Moosbrugger was experienced, aggressive, and confident in destroyer torpedo tactics. Wilkinson gave him command of Task Group 31.2, 6 destroyers. Freedom to disregard standard tactical advice about avoiding torpedo actions. Authorization to use destroyers as the primary attack force rather than defensive screening units. Moosbrugger stated his confidence clearly. His division could utilize the destroyer's primary weapon, the torpedo. Not guns, torpedoes. This was the moment Burke's tactical concepts would be tested in combat. Moosbrugger had studied Burke's ideas. He understood the principles. Find the enemy first with radar, close to torpedo range silently. Launch a massive coordinated torpedo attack. Turn away before the enemy could respond. Follow up with gunfire only after torpedoes struck. Moosbrugger held a conference with all 6 commanding officers on the morning of August 6th. He explained the battle plan in detail. Division 1, consisting of USS Dunlap, USS Craven, and USS Maury, would attack with torpedoes if they encountered Japanese destroyers. Division 2, consisting of USS Lang, USS Sterett, and USS Stack, had replaced some torpedo tubes with additional anti-aircraft guns. They would handle any barges and provide gunfire support after the torpedo attack. The plan was 3 pages long, written in precise language with unambiguous orders. All surface contacts encountered in Vella Gulf are enemy. Primary target destroyers, secondary target barges. The 2 divisions would operate 4,000 yards apart in separate columns. When radar detected the Japanese, the closest division would maneuver into attack position and fire torpedoes. Then turn away. The 2nd Division would cross ahead of the Japanese formation to attack from a new direction. Simple maneuvers, tight formations, clear tactical picture. This was revolutionary for American destroyer forces. No cruisers to slow them down, no complex coordination requirements, no waiting for orders from senior officers miles away, just destroyers doing what destroyers were built to do: attack enemy ships with torpedoes. Task Group 31.2 departed Tulagi at 11:30 on August 6th. The destroyers entered Vella Gulf from the south at 10 in the evening. They swept the southern approaches first, finding nothing. Then they turned north and proceeded up the Gulf at moderate speed. Radar operators watched their screens intently. The Japanese were expected. The question was when they would appear. At 11:33, radar contact. 10 miles to the north, 4 targets, Japanese destroyers exactly where intelligence predicted. Closing rapidly on a course toward Blackett Strait, Moosbrugger immediately ordered his ships to turn to course 335 degrees. This would close the range and position Division 1 for optimal torpedo attack. The Japanese still had not detected the American destroyers. The Americans were positioned against the dark shoreline of Kolombangara. Japanese lookouts were scanning open water where they expected any American ships to be. Range decreased rapidly. 8,000 yards. 7,000. 6,000. Moosbrugger waited. He needed to be close enough that torpedoes would hit before the Japanese could evade, but not so close that Japanese lookouts would spot the American ships before torpedoes launched. At 11:41, Moosbrugger gave the order, fire torpedoes. All ships in Division 1 launched their full spreads. USS Dunlap fired 10 torpedoes. USS Craven fired 10 torpedoes. USS Maury fired 4 torpedoes from her operational tubes. 24 Mark 15 torpedoes raced toward the Japanese formation at 46 knots. Moosbrugger immediately ordered a 90-degree turn to starboard. His ships peeled away from the attack course. If the Japanese had already launched their own torpedoes, the turn would complicate their firing solution. If they launched after detecting the American attack, the range would be too great for accurate hits. But the Japanese had not launched anything. They were still unaware American destroyers were in the Gulf. Their lookouts were focused on the wrong area. Their radar, if operating, had not detected the American ships against the shoreline clutter. Captain Kaju Sugiura commanded the 4 destroyers. His flagship Shigure carried no troops. Hagikaze, Arashi, and Kawakaze were loaded with soldiers and supplies. The Japanese were absolutely confident they were safe. 3 previous Tokyo Express runs through Vella Gulf had been successful. American forces were expected to be far to the south. Standard procedure called for careful watch, but not extreme vigilance. After all, the Americans had failed to stop them on August 1st, when 15 PT boats fired 30 torpedoes and achieved nothing except the loss of PT-109. The Americans finally spotted the American destroyers just after Moosbrugger's ships turned away. Too late, far too late. 24 torpedoes were already in the water. Run time at current range was approximately 2 minutes. The Japanese had no time to evade, no time to launch their own torpedoes, no time to prepare for impact. At 11:43, the first Mark 15 torpedo struck Hagikaze amidships. The explosion tore through the engine room. A second torpedo hit near the bow. The destroyer burst into flames and began sinking immediately. Arashi took multiple hits almost simultaneously. 3 torpedoes struck her hull. The explosions broke her keel. She was dead in the water and burning fiercely within seconds. Kawakaze suffered the same fate. Torpedo hits along her length, massive fires, loss of power. The ship began capsizing. Shigure took 1 hit in the rudder, but that torpedo was a dud. The warhead failed to detonate. The torpedo passed through the rudder assembly and continued past. Captain Sugiura immediately ordered maximum speed and turned into the darkness. His ship was the only survivor. Division 2 under Commander Roger Simpson crossed ahead of the burning Japanese destroyers. They opened fire with guns. High explosive shells poured into the already destroyed vessels. It was unnecessary. The torpedo attack had been overwhelming. The burning Japanese destroyers lit up Vella Gulf like torches. Hagikaze capsized first, taking most of her crew with her. Arashi and Kawakaze followed within minutes. Nearly 700 sailors and almost 900 soldiers died in the water. Most refused rescue by American ships. Small groups of survivors reached Vella La Vella over the following days. The Japanese army lost an entire battalion that never fired a shot. American losses remained 0. Not 1 casualty. Not 1 ship damaged. The most one-sided night surface action of the Pacific War to that point. When word reached Admiral William Halsey's headquarters at Noumea, staff officers initially doubted the reports. 6 American destroyers had sunk 3 Japanese destroyers and suffered no losses whatsoever in night combat against the Imperial Japanese Navy? The numbers seemed impossible, given everything that had happened over the previous year. But the reports were accurate. Commander Moosbrugger's force returned to Tulagi on August 7th. His after-action report was studied immediately by every senior officer in the South Pacific. The battle had demonstrated several critical lessons. Radar provided overwhelming advantage when used aggressively rather than defensively. Torpedoes were devastating when launched from close range before the enemy detected your presence. Independent destroyer operations freed from cruiser support allowed faster decision-making and more flexible tactics. Surprise mattered more than firepower. Most importantly, American destroyers could beat Japanese destroyers in night combat if they attacked first. The psychological impact on both sides was profound. Japanese commanders who had spent 20 months dominating night actions were suddenly facing an enemy that could find them first, strike without warning. The invincibility of Japanese night fighting doctrine evaporated in one engagement. Within a week, Japanese forces began evacuating Kolombangara. The island they had fought so hard to reinforce was abandoned. The Tokyo Express could no longer operate with confidence in the Solomons. For American destroyer crews, Vella Gulf validated everything Arleigh Burke had been preaching. The tactical concepts worked, the training paid off, the equipment functioned when used properly. Destroyers operating independently as offensive strike forces could achieve decisive victories. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Commodore Burke received command of Destroyer Squadron 23 in October 1943. His flagship was USS Charles Osborne, a new Fletcher-class destroyer displacing 2,100 tons and capable of 38 knots. The squadron was nicknamed the Little Beavers. Burke's orders from Admiral Halsey were simple. Stop the Tokyo Express, protect American forces landing on Bougainville, destroy Japanese shipping attempting to reinforce their garrisons. Burke implemented his tactical concepts immediately. He drilled his destroyer captains relentlessly on radar-guided night torpedo attacks, simple battle plans with clear objectives, two-column formations that could divide to attack from multiple directions, delegation of authority to individual ship commanders who could react without waiting for orders, unity of command during actual combat. Every officer knew the doctrine before going into battle. There is no time in battle to give orders. People must know what to do before they go into battle. The Little Beavers fought their first major engagement at the Battle of Empress Augusta Bay on November 1, 1943. Rear Admiral Aaron Stanton Merrill commanded 4 light cruisers and 8 destroyers against a similar-sized Japanese force attempting to attack American troops landing at Cape Torokina on Bougainville. Burke's destroyers engaged independently using the two-column formation tactics. They launched coordinated torpedo attacks that disrupted Japanese formations and allowed American cruisers to engage effectively with gunfire. The battle was decisive. 4 Japanese cruisers were sunk or heavily damaged, along with 2 destroyers. American losses were 2 ships lightly damaged. Merrill's force had applied Burke's doctrine at the task force level with overwhelming success. 3 weeks later came Cape St. George. On November 24th, American intelligence detected another Japanese reinforcement mission to Buka. 5 destroyers carrying 920 troops to reinforce the garrison and evacuate 700 naval personnel from the damaged airfield. Admiral Halsey ordered Burke to intercept and destroy the Japanese force. Burke's squadron was hundreds of miles away at Purvis Bay refueling. His ships had been in almost continuous combat for months. They needed maintenance. Charles Osborne's boilers were malfunctioning. Maximum speed was reduced to 31 knots instead of 38. Halsey sent a message that would give Burke his famous nickname. 31 knot, Burke. Get athwart the Buka-Rabaul evacuation line. If enemy contacted, you know what to do. Burke departed immediately with 5 destroyers. Destroyer Division 45 under his direct command consisted of Charles Osborne, Claxton and Dyson. Destroyer Division 46 under Commander Bernard Austin consisted of Converse and Spence. 9 PT boats under Commander Henry Farrow were positioned near Buka Passage as backup if Burke's force failed to make contact. The Japanese completed their mission at Buka without interference. Captain Kyoto Kagawa commanded the force. His 2 escort destroyers Onami and Makinami screened 3 transport destroyers, Amagiri, Yugiri, and Uzuki carrying troops and evacuees. The formation departed Buka after midnight on November 25th, heading west toward Rabaul. Burke positioned his destroyers between Cape St. George and Buka to intercept the returning Japanese force. At 1:41 in the morning, Dyson's radar detected contacts 11 miles to the east. 4 targets, the Japanese force heading west. Burke's destroyers were undetected. Visibility was poor. Japanese lookouts could not see the American ships. Burke immediately executed the Vela Gulf tactics. His division would attack with torpedoes. Austin's division would hold position ready to follow up with gunfire. Burke maneuvered to close the range. 5,500 yards, close enough for reliable torpedo hits, far enough that Japanese lookouts still could not detect the American ships in darkness. At 1:55, Burke's 3 destroyers launched 15 torpedoes at the Japanese escort destroyers, then turned sharply to evade any potential counterattack. The Japanese lookouts spotted incoming torpedoes only 30 seconds before impact. Too late for evasive maneuvers. Onami took multiple hits and exploded at 2 o'clock in the morning. She sank immediately with all hands. Captain Kagawa died with his ship. Makinami took one torpedo hit that disabled her engines. She remained afloat but dead in the water. Burke's radar simultaneously detected the 3 Japanese transport destroyers 13,000 yards to the east. Captain Katsumori Yamashiro saw explosions consuming the escort destroyers. He ordered his 3 ships to turn north at maximum speed and flee toward Rabaul. Austin's destroyer Division 46 remained behind to finish Makinami. Converse and Spence closed to torpedo range and fired additional weapons. Then poured gunfire into the crippled destroyer. Makinami sank under concentrated fire. Burke's 3 destroyers pursued the fleeing Japanese transports. The chase lasted over an hour. Japanese destroyers were heavily loaded with troops and evacuees. They could not match the speed of Burke's ships. At 2:22 in the morning, American destroyers opened fire. Shells struck all 3 Japanese vessels. Uzuki took 1 hit, but the shell failed to detonate. She continued fleeing. Amagiri escaped without significant damage through skillful maneuvering. At 2:25, the 3 Japanese destroyers split up, attempting to escape separately. Burke chose to concentrate his entire force on Ugiri, rather than dividing to chase multiple targets. This decision demonstrated the tactical discipline that made Burke exceptional. He prioritized destroying 1 confirmed target over potentially losing all 3. The chase continued for over an hour. Ugiri fought back with gunfire and torpedoes. Japanese long-lance torpedoes detonated in the wakes of American destroyers but scored no hits. At 3:28 in the morning, concentrated American gunfire finally overwhelmed Ugiri. The destroyer exploded and sank after fierce resistance. By 3:45, both American divisions had regrouped and continued pursuit north, but Burke called off the chase at 4 o'clock. His ships were low on fuel and ammunition. More importantly, daylight was approaching. Japanese air bases at Rabaul held 58 bombers and 145 fighters. Operating in daylight within range of those aircraft would be suicidal without air cover. Burke withdrew his squadron south. When daylight came, no Japanese aircraft appeared. Either they did not know the American destroyer's position or could not locate them in time. Burke later called it the grace of divine providence. The Battle of Cape Street, George was the last major surface engagement in the Solomon Islands campaign. It was also one of the most one-sided victories in naval history. 3 Japanese destroyers sunk, 1 damaged. American losses? 0 ships, 0 casualties. 1 dud torpedo that struck an American destroyer but failed to detonate. The Naval War College called it an almost perfect surface action. Admiral Halsey called it the Trafalgar of the Pacific. The battle ended the Tokyo Express. Japanese naval convoys could no longer operate in the Solomons with any expectation of success. Destroyer Squadron 23 received the Presidential Unit Citation for actions, including Cape Street George. It was the only destroyer squadron in World War II to receive this honor. Burke received the Navy Cross for tactical genius that allowed him to carry the battle plot in his head and anticipate enemy actions before they occurred. But the significance of Cape Street George went far beyond one battle. It proved that the tactical revolution begun at Vella Gulf was not a fluke. American destroyers operating under Burke's doctrine could consistently defeat Japanese forces in night combat. The transformation from defensive failure to offensive dominance was complete. The final vindication came 11 months later at Surigao Strait, October 25, 1944. The Battle of Leyte Gulf was the largest naval engagement in history. Multiple Japanese task forces attempted to destroy American invasion forces landing on Leyte in the Philippines. The Southern Force, under Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura, consisted of 2 battleships, 1 cruiser, and 4 destroyers. They would attack through Surigao Strait between Leyte and Mindanao. Rear Admiral Jesse Oldendorf commanded the defensive force blocking the strait. 6 battleships, 5 of them survivors of Pearl Harbor, including West Virginia, Tennessee, California, Maryland, and Pennsylvania. 8 cruisers, 28 destroyers, 39 PT boats. Oldendorf had learned the lessons of Vella Gulf and Cape Street George. He arranged his battleships at the northern mouth of the strait in a classic crossing the T formation. But more importantly, he deployed his destroyers to attack independently with torpedoes before the perfect battleships engaged. 3 destroyer squadrons positioned to strike the Japanese column from multiple directions as it advanced through the narrow waters. This was Burke's doctrine applied at the largest scale yet attempted. Destroyers as primary offensive weapons, independent operations, torpedo attacks first, gunfire support second. The PT boats made first contact with Nishimura's force at 10:36 in the evening on October 24th. They harassed the Japanese ships but achieved no significant hits. Nishimura pressed forward into the strait. At 3 o'clock in the morning on October 25th, American destroyer squadrons launched their attacks. Destroyer Squadron 54, under Captain Jesse Coward, attacked from the east. Destroyer Squadron 24, under Captain Kenneth McMains, attacked from the west. They closed to torpedo range using radar guidance. They fired full salvos before Japanese lookouts detected them. The results were devastating. Multiple torpedoes struck battleship Fuso amidships. She caught fire immediately and broke in half. Both sections continued burning as they drifted apart. Fuso sank at 3:30, with massive loss of life. 2 Japanese destroyers, Michishio and Asagumo, were also struck by torpedoes and sank. Destroyer Yamagumo was badly damaged and later sank. Battleship Yamashiro took torpedo hits but continued advancing. She was crippled but still afloat. Destroyer Squadron 56, under Captain Roland Smoot, executed the final torpedo attack from ahead of the Japanese formation. His ships were positioned to ensure the enemy would pass through torpedo waters no matter which way he turns. Smoot's destroyers launched their torpedoes and withdrew before Japanese guns could respond effectively. More torpedoes struck Yamashiro. The battleship was now critically damaged, but she continued forward toward the American battle line. At 3:51 in the morning, American cruisers opened fire from the flanks. At 3:53, the 6 American battleships opened fire. The battle line was crossing the T perfectly. Japanese ships could only fire their forward guns. American battleships could fire full broadsides from all turrets. The gunnery was devastatingly accurate. West Virginia, California, and Tennessee had been modernized with gun radar. They opened fire at ranges exceeding 20,000 yards and scored hits immediately. Yamashiro absorbed dozens of heavy-caliber shells. She was on fire from bow to stern. At 4:19, Yamashiro rolled over and sank. Vice Admiral Nishimura died with his flagship. Only destroyer Shigure escaped the slaughter. The same Shigure that had survived Vella Gulf 15 months earlier when a dud torpedo passed through her rudder. Captain Shigeru Nishino successfully evaded American forces and withdrew south at maximum speed. The Battle of Surigao Strait lasted less than 3 hours. It was the last engagement between battleship battle lines in history. But the outcome had been decided by destroyer torpedo attacks before the battleships ever fired a shot. The tactics developed by Burke and proven at Vella Gulf and Cape Street, George had destroyed a Japanese battle force that would have overwhelmed American forces using pre-war doctrine. Admiral Oldendorf's after-action report emphasized the decisive role of destroyer torpedo attacks. His destroyers had struck first. They had achieved surprise. They had crippled the Japanese formation before it could engage effectively. The battleship action was merely the finishing blow against already beaten ships. The transformation of American destroyer tactics from Savo Island to Surigao Strait represented one of the most successful doctrinal evolutions in naval history. In 26 months, the United States Navy went from suffering catastrophic defeats in night combat to achieving overwhelming victories using the same basic equipment. The difference was not technology, it was doctrine. Several factors enabled this transformation. First was the systematic study of failure. After Savo Island, Tassafaronga, and other defeats, American commanders analyzed what went wrong. They identified specific tactical problems. They developed solutions based on careful study rather than emotional reaction. The official inquiries were painful but productive. Second was the development of new tactical concepts by officers like Arleigh Burke, who combined combat experience with analytical thinking. Burke spent months studying Japanese tactics and American capabilities before proposing his revolutionary doctrine. His ideas were based on evidence rather than tradition. Third was the willingness of senior commanders to test new concepts in combat. Admiral Wilkinson authorized Moosbrugger to disregard standard tactical advice and use destroyers as primary attack forces at Vella Gulf. Admiral Halsey gave Burke freedom to implement his doctrine with Destroyer Squadron 23. Senior leadership recognized that current tactics were failing and new approaches deserved testing. Fourth was the proper exploitation of American technological advantages. Radar gave American ships the ability to detect enemy forces first, but radar only mattered if commanders used it aggressively to achieve surprise, rather than defensively to avoid surprise. Burke understood that technology was meaningless without proper tactics to exploit it. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.